Yes. So it's been Rasan and Kari presenting their favorite features. So now it's my time to talk a bit about my favorite feature from last year, which is the datasets. So the dataset, basically what it is, it's a feature that allows you to create and track collections of files. And essentially that means collections of Valohai datum URLs. So you can create the datasets from all of your execution outputs, for example, or any other file that has been gone through Valohai. For example, if you upload files to your data store via the UI. And these datasets, they can be used as inputs in your executions instead of your regular datum URLs. And you can create the datasets in the UI programmatically from your code. So you can basically automate this for your execution outputs. And then, of course, with API calls as well, like everything in Valohai. You can create aliases for the datasets. So there is always the latest alias is always available for you, but you can, of course, have your own aliases as well if that's what you prefer. And then one nice thing is that this enhances collaboration inside your team because you can, of course, share these with everybody. And to get started, I recommend going to our documentation at help.valohai.com. And just a quick sneak peek, if you want to go to your Valohai account already now and see where you can find these, it's under Data tab, and there's a separate datasets tab under that one.
I just realized we say go to our documentation site quite often.
Yeah, we do. And of course, ask us if you need some more help with that. Just a couple of concepts related to the datasets before we go to Andres's presentation. So in datasets, instead of always creating new datasets, you actually create new dataset versions under your datasets. And you can create new datasets based on existing ones, which means that then in the UI, you can track the previous version of your current dataset, or also see what's the next version for that dataset, that if there has been one created based on.
I think, Laura, you went on mute.
Oh no, where? I wonder when did I mute myself?
Oh, just not a lot. You mentioned about next versions and previous versions.
Okay, yeah, that's good. And the next thing that I was about to say was about the dataset version URL, which is available here in the UI, and you can use that in the inputs for your executions. Yep. Let's check the next slide. Yeah. Like mentioned, you create the datasets either in the UI. There you can, if you want to create one based on previous datasets, you can then either add files to that or remove files from the previous dataset. And similarly, you can do that in your code and then automate creating the datasets from the execution outputs. And in the when you do the dataset version creation programmatically, you can also create or assign the aliases there. Yep. And then one more slide. So I mentioned that you can use the datasets as inputs. You like with any datum URL, you just put that in your Valohai.yaml file. And instead of using the dataset version name, you can of course use the dataset aliases that you have created. And like I mentioned already, the alias latest is always pointing to the latest alias in that dataset, or the latest version of that dataset. But in addition to that, you can create the aliases yourself if that's what you prefer. Yes. Okay, I think now it's time for Andres. Andres is a principal data scientist at KONUX, and we thought to invite him to give a short presentation how they are using the dataset, because Andres is kind of a super user on the dataset. So I thought that would be very interesting for for you other Valohai users to hear as well. Yeah, so the stage is yours.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. So thank you very much. I'll try not to go too long, or rather, that's what I hope. I'm not sure if power user is the right word, but yeah. All right. Anyway, so thank you for inviting me. Again, Andres Hernandez. I'm a principal data scientist at KONUX. I will not say too much about KONUX. We are a railway startup. Our main goal is to help railway companies with predictive maintenance, improve availability of the assets, that sort of thing. The main data source that we have is a sensor that we install on the tracks that measures acceleration. And then we have like a whole backend thing that we try to learn from, also learn with, and hopefully get some value to the clients afterwards, right? This I'll skip because it was already well described. So at KONUX, we are currently about 15 data scientists. We work in missions, or like in projects. Usually we have 4 to 6 concurrent missions going at the same time. The missions might have other types of people in there, so like backend developers, front-end developers, other kinds of roles besides data scientists. But usually they will have at least 2 data scientists if there's like a data science part of that project, right? So we work in small projects generally. The projects go over like 3 months to a year. And the topics sometimes have like this long pauses between getting picked up again, right? And that is probably, so rather that is part of the problem that generates. It's not always the same people. The people, we don't have like a heavy rotation, right? So we almost everybody that has joined the company for data science has stayed in data science. But if the topic will be retaken 6 months from now, then maybe those people were working on another project, for example, right? So they're not available to work again on this. We do have specialization, so it's not like everybody's replaceable by everybody else, but sometimes it's not possible. So it brings us to the first problem that we have, which is like, how do we allow anyone to quickly start working on a topic? Right, so if you're not going to work on a topic for 6 months, for example, right? So you forget where the data was set, where is the code, where is the results. So how do I find what was the latest model that was trained for a particular client data 6 months ago, right? So all that should be answerable immediately without having to think, without having to ask other people about it, right? And the other part is that we have about 15% of our time, we are encouraged to work on personal projects. But also, if maybe you worked on a project or on a mission a while ago, and you remember there was something I wanted to try, I didn't get a chance to try, I want to go try it out. But if every time you want to do a personal project, it would take you so long to collect the data or to label the data, that sort of thing, it's just not going to be efficient, right? So what we want is that anyone can start working on it, either because they were assigned to the topic or because they are working from their personal experience, but they should be able to get on top fairly quickly, right? And the solution, or part of the solution, is divided into 2 parts. One is the documentation. It should be super clear what were the results, where the data is, that sort of thing. And I would see the data sets as part of that documentation. It is not like a classical documentation where somebody would write, but if I'm going to start on that topic, I don't have to ask anybody about it, right? I know what was the latest data set that was used to train a model for that client. I know that this is the execution that was used for production because it was tagged as production, for example, that sort of thing, right? The other part would be the common tools. If there are things that we normally would do, so we have tended to work very independently, right? Because we would split off for long periods of time. So people tend to redevelop the wheel over and over again, right? So part of that would be an idea of trying to move as much as possible into a central library. But the other part is that you want to be able to come into a new project and be able to pick up the things that they were doing very quickly because the code is already familiar to you, right? Not because you wrote it, but because it looks very similar to the type of code you also wrote, right? And that we are trying to enforce through, or to improve through code reviews. But the other part is this programmatic dataset creation, which would be, we can have a rule where we say, yes, at the end, this pipeline produced labels. Please now go create a dataset so that anybody else can find that this is the dataset to use for that. But people forget things, right? And then if we do it like that, eventually there will be a lot of inconsistency. So the idea would be to move it such that, yes, the last part, if you know that is a pipeline, for example, for the labeling or for the training, the last part of that pipeline or that execution should produce a dataset so that it is easy to find, for example, right? And you would see, so the datasets are in these two places. Generally, we have like two types of jobs related to this. One is producing labels, and the other one is producing the model. And I would have two different types of datasets. From Valohai's perspective, they're the same thing, right? So there is no difference if I'm saving a model in the dataset or if I'm saving a Parquet file and a NumPy file, right? So there's no difference to it. But conceptually, for me, I would normally divide them into, yes, this is like the model dataset. These are the labels dataset. Again, the tags is the part where it might work, it might not work. Sometimes you forget to tag them. Sometimes, yes. They're supposed to have production if it's going to be the production one, but people forget to take it off when they make a new one. So you just have to know, okay, well, I'll look for the latest one, for example, right? That sort of thing. It's a bit less, a bit more free. So we need to adjust a little bit, but just like creating the dataset is super easy, right? So like your last execution, at the end of the execution, it does something like this. So right now the approach that we have is supposed to use the execution counter as the version, because that's part of the thing, right? So you need to have a new version for every update or for every new version, right? So for every update to the dataset, you need to have a version number. The version number that is currently being used is this execution counter. Originally, it was like the date when it was created, but the problem is, of course, if you create more than one, then you start calling it like 3rd of March 2023 A, B, C, right? So, but okay, the counter is a simple solution to that. You have it available inside your execution, and you would just add it to it. Whether there might be a better one, I'm not sure. Right? I'm sure there must be a better approach. This I found very practical, and because anyway, I don't have to remember that what is the execution counter. I always just use the latest one, right? So if I'm going to start something new, I can just use latest, and that's fine. But if I want to know, okay, what is the latest one? Which execution was it? It's easy to link with it, that sort of thing. The second problem that we have, and for which then the datasets will become even more central, is the lack of ground truth in our industry, right? So we want to do predictive maintenance. The problem is we have no ground truth, right? So we have a lot of unsupervised learning and a lot of things to that effect, trying to come up with this hidden truth behind it. But when we collect data from the client, for example, where we ask for their maintenance records, they are full of inaccuracies, not because they're not able to to collect records. It's just the nature of their industry, right? For example, if they have a budget for doing a maintenance type A of 100 times a year, and the team has a maintenance of a budget for 50 of the other one, if they run out of budget for one, they will just put in the system that they did the other one, right? So because they need to do it. Or they might have gone to the field and it's 3 a.m. and they forgot to put that they did something, for example, right? I mean, I understand it's 3 a.m, it's raining, I want to go home, I'm not going to sit around doing a lot of documentation. But the fact of the matter is that the documentation is bad, or it has a lot of errors. Even for the Japanese client, I had expected, oh, their documentation, or rather their maintenance records are going to be perfect. There's not going to be any errors there. No, there still had a lot of errors. So we don't have ground truth. So we have spent a lot of effort, and we are going to develop it very, very soon. The last step, which was to take out the human out of the loop, right? So what we used to have was this part that was producing some clusters. So there was a big model that was producing, was running in an unsupervised manner. It would produce clusters, but the clusters had no human relatable name, right? So someone had to go look and understand what is the label that I can assign to this cluster, and also review whether the clusters were clean or bad, right? So sometimes they were not as super clean as we would have wanted to. So there was a human in the middle, but we will extend the amount of data we collect this year by 10 times at least. And that means we can no longer afford to have the human sit there and look at that data. Even the reduced data that we were producing, it's no longer there. We have some breakthroughs in the last few months, so that will finally be able to take out the human, and it will automatically come up with the labels that the model needs to then train. But of course, once we start doing that, there will be some quality assurance that will become super important that we need to develop, that it's not yet developed. First, to determine whether the model needs to be retrained, but also once the model is retrained, to actually determine whether it gets deployed automatically. Again, without having any ground truth, it's not as trivial, right? So we will do a lot of distribution shifts, that sort of investigation. But at the end, as this process will run automatically, it will become even more important that someone is able to immediately, in a second, so go find what was the label dataset that was used and what is the model that's being used in production. Because if something is going wrong, and we need to investigate very quickly, we don't want to waste time trying to go find out in Git, okay, where is the direction in Git that might tell me what model is being used, for example, right? So at that point, the label datasets will become even more stringently important, and also the model dataset as well, right? So that, because that one is the one that the Jenkins job for production will take from there to release. But yeah, so it will become even more central to that use. I mean, I like it a lot, the sense that it is simple to use. We can do it programmatically. You can do it at the end of the execution. I did it for a long time on the UI, and then it was like, well, this is so much easier if I do it from the execution, right? But yeah. Anyway, that's it for my side. Maybe I can stop sharing or.
Yeah, sure. Big thanks, Andres. That was really interesting. And I think we have a couple of minutes for questions if someone in the audience might have some. You can write them in the chat on the lower right corner. There's a box for questions. But I could actually start. I have a couple of questions prepared for Andres here. So you kind of covered this already, but like in a few words, what would be the biggest benefit for you from the datasets?
Yes, I should have been a bit more clear, I think. So it is collaboration, right? It should allow us to collaborate better than what we are doing now. So we tend to work very independently from each other. And this is, for me, a central step to collaborate. Yeah.
That's really great to hear. Then how about like when you started using the datasets, did you have to somehow do some restructuring on how you work with your data, or how was that?
I mean, I did do a little bit of restructuring, but it's not that it was needed. It's just that I had a very messy structure for how I was giving the input data. So I took it as an opportunity to like clean up and say, okay, well, instead of having like these forced directories where it would automatically know this is where the label data goes, this is where the features goes for training, it's now much more streamlined. So I did do some work, but it was not work that I needed to do. I just took it as an opportunity to do it.
Yeah. So for your workflows, the datasets they just slipped in there, or they worked like. Yes. That's really great to hear. Then one thing that's interesting about the about your data and how you then work with the data sets is like, does your data refresh often, or how often does that refresh? What I mean is that how often do you need to create new dataset versions, for example?
I mean, it refreshes very often. I mean, every day we're getting new measurements, right? So we get about 100 measurements from every location where we have the sensor. So it's about 100 trained passes over the sensor.
Yeah.
However, it is not every day. I mean, yeah, so you would not need to retrain every day, right? So the system does not shift or change so often. The problem now, so why we need to do that automation right now is because we're going to install about 10 times the number of sensors that we have now. So we will have to run it every week at least, right? So to check that, hey, is it working well for the new sensors? Take it in the data, process it, that sort of thing. So for this year, it will run almost every week. Eventually, I don't think we will need to run it so often, but we'll have to see. And that is part of how I would adjust it, because, for example, if I run it every week, for example, the data extraction for most of the sensors that are there should not extract as much data as it needs. There's already a data extraction from the past that is perfectly fine, so it will just add a little bit to those, for example. So we will have to think how that process will extract data, right? So it will add more. So instead of like replacing the files like I'm doing now, it will just add to the dataset more than it used to do.
Yeah, and especially I guess there the opportunity to do that programmatically from your code is kind of crucial for that. Yeah, exactly. Any questions in the chat or any other Valohai people having questions for you? No questions in the chat. Well, I do have one more question. So do you have any good tips for these people listening to this this presentation here? How to get started with datasets, or how to use the datasets and get the most out of them as a pro user?
I mean, there is not that much that can go wrong, right? So at the end, I would say it's to just start using it and just adjust it later. For example, yeah, like I said, the first versions used to be the date, and I would put them, and then I would just put like A, B, C, but that's just ridiculous solution, right? But it doesn't matter. So, okay, yes, if you go back enough in the version, it would look like that, but it's actually not, it doesn't break anything, right? So it doesn't actually create a necessity for backwards, so to stop you from backwards compatibility or something like that. So it's better just to try it, use it, and then improve it as one goes on.
Awesome. I think that's a really great tip for all of you future dataset users. Yeah. Big thanks, Andres. That was a great presentation and really, really nice use case from you. Thanks for participating today.
No problem.